Hello and welcome. My name is Tanya, and this is the Hospice and Home Care Webinar Network. Today we're taking a look at cultural competency, religious and spiritually diverse practices in death, dying, and bereavement. We're thrilled to have you join us for the next 60 minutes. In the Q&A tab to the right of your screen, you can message me directly if you have any technical issues, as well as download the webinar materials, which are located under handouts to the right of your screen in your user portal. Today's presentation includes a Q&A session, so please feel free to submit your questions at any time in the Q&A to the right of your screen. There will also be a time to respond to case studies, so please have your Q&A open and be prepared. A big thank you to our local hospice and home care state associations for sponsoring today's webinar, with content led by Julie Geistweit and the entire program directed by the Hospice and Home Care Webinar Network. Julie is the founder of Ripple of Light Bereavement Resource Center, LLC, and an advanced certified paleontologist and Pennsylvania licensed social worker with 20 years of experience in various care settings, including nursing homes, home health, hospice, and funeral homes. She brings over a decade of experience in higher education and 6 years of virtual professional development presenter. Dr. Geistweit is the creator of the social work profession's first scale of evaluating and enhancing expertise in death, dying, and bereavement care. As you can see by her bio, we are in excellent hands today. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the program over to Julie Geistweit.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you for the honor of that very special introduction and background. And moreover, I thank each of you for taking time out of your crazy busy schedules to participate or to review today's training on an integral aspect of cultural competency. It's, in a sense, preparing us to assist the religious and spiritually diverse population that is increasingly rising nationwide. Most recent data indicates that by the Public Religion Research Institute that a rising number of persons are reporting holding a religious or spiritual diverse belief system different than Christian, which for historically has been the primary belief system in the United States. Increasingly, the median age for individuals in the Jewish population in particular has declined from 52 in 2013 to 48 in 2020. So in a sense, our diversity population excitedly is increasing. And the goal of today's training is to advance your knowledge and skills in comfortably caring for patients from the home care setting to the hospice, end of life, and bereavement context that hold religious or spiritually diverse beliefs and practices other than those you might not be familiar with, or different or in unique ways than those that you have encountered to date. I'd like to begin with a quote taken from Goldsberry that I'll review the quote for us. While I'm doing so, I want each of you to take a moment to consider, what does the quote tell you about the relationship between culture and patients coping with home health issues, hospice issues, palliative care issues? And type your thoughts into our Q&A. As Tanya mentioned, I'm very much of an engaging instructor, so we're going to have a lot of times today where we're using the Q&A to share our clinical thoughts, questions, to grow together. The quote for today, and I'd like you to reflect upon, the culture in which a loss occurs has a profound effect on a bereaved person in the ways in which the death is interpreted, both at the individual and societal level. Please type your thoughts on how you think this might relate to anything or tells you about anything with the patients or the families that you work with. I'll give you a moment to consider that. As each of you continue to think about that, and please go ahead and post your thoughts into our Q&A. Often, practitioners will mention that there's that disconnection sometimes between healthcare practitioners' knowledge and where the patient or the family currently resides in their belief system or practices that are important at the end of life, and the importance of, wow, I need to continue to grow my skills in this area, or also the component of where at the societal level, institutions often do not understand or recognize those diversity in the practices of a patient or in their family. And that's really what we're going to look into today. Our objective and our goal was really to better position you to support and navigate care of religious and spiritually diverse populations. To review our objectives for today, we're going to distinguish between religion and spirituality, compare and contrast the pre- and post-death related beliefs and practices of 4 religious, spiritually diverse populations. We're going to assess patient, family-centered cultural variations in death and belief practices. We're going to look at best practices to communicate with religious and spiritually diverse patients and families. And we're going to delve into 3 barriers to the healthy processing of bereavement that are distinct to religious and spiritually diverse populations. And great thoughts were posted into our Q&A. The cultures that fear the discussions of death and dying may not feel comfortable reaching out to a bereaved person. Absolutely. And that's where we're here today. Thank you so much, Noelle, for that thought, because where we are as our culture and even practical ways of understanding how do we do so. That's what we're going to cover today. You're going to walk away with some practices and some how-tos on things. Some families see death as a stepping stone on the personal journey. Absolutely. Others, like from a Buddhist perspective, celebrate death and prepare for it. It's contrasted with others based on the culture that don't even talk about it. Absolutely. And that's a key component. As my years in social work practice in the field of hospice, particularly, there was that kind of ambiguity. Where do we go? How do we talk to the patients or the families about where death is based on their belief systems? And what we're going to cover today will help you feel a little more comfortable when you encounter those types of situations. To give you a framework for our time together today, I'm going to begin with a discussion of some key terminology and then look at some demographics. And then we're going to shift into looking at some background, best practice information, communication, and then into our population analysis from there. Bereavement, grief, and mourning are 3 key concepts I want to just refresh your memory or bring to a component for you. These definitions come from the Association for Death Education and Counseling, which is the Thanatotheology Association. Bereavement is seen as something unwillingly taken away. It's the objective aspect of loss. We're talking about it today in the context of life. Bereavement also often occurs for an older adult that needs to begin to use a walker or can no longer safely drive. Grief is that biopsychosocial, cognitive, spiritual, somatic reaction to that loss. Grief is often posed in the perspective of this is the intrapersonal response to that loss, where mourning is more the interpersonal. So grief is the intrapersonal and mourning is more the interpersonal, which is more of the cultural patterns, the norms, and the rituals. And there are key things we're going to see in today in our difference and variations along the way. Religion is often referred to as an organized system of beliefs and behaviors associated with worship of a higher power or a higher beings of some kind. Religion is often considered more of like the structured piece and has very much of a narrow focus, where spirituality is contextualized as a progressive life and development process that involves things like searching for meaning or purpose or morality, or connecting with oneself or others or other beings in a way, or another universe. Also can be posed in the context of a sense of transcendence. Often, Spirituality is continued the more individual piece, and religion is more that structured piece. That said, religious people sometimes have their own spiritual relationship with that higher being interwoven in that, but the religious is more that context of the formal perspectives of examples like church service attendance, reading of scriptures, those kind of things. Most recent Pew Research data indicates that 70% of individuals express that they hold spiritual beliefs, and a number, 22% at the same time do not hold any religious beliefs. So in a sense, 22% of Americans are spiritual but not religious. This is a demographic shift that continues to evolve, related to factors like disconnections with churches, systemic issues within faith perspectives, also more of that rising focus on the individuality component. To give you more of a visual image of where our excitingly largest non-Christian religion perspectives exist, this graph map is taken from the 2020 U.S. religion census data. Of the populations we're going to be discussing today, the Islamic is considered the largest and the Buddhist is considered the second largest. And take a moment to reflect on the map. You can kind of see what may exist in your geographic area or some surprises that you didn't even know were there. I am actually in the Pennsylvania area, and I was actually surprised to see the extent of the Islamic population in the state. And as I said, these are rising groups, and that's really makes it more fundamental for us to increase our knowledge and exposure to them. For a moment, I want each of you to take a thought here and think, on a scale of 1 to 5, what's your awareness level of religious and spiritually diverse practices in death, dying, and bereavement? And type your response actually into the queue. That way they'll become more evident for all of us to see a little bit on my end. Where do you feel we are? Are we 1? Are we a novice? Or are we a 5, an expert? And Tanya's going to give us a kind of a summary here in a moment or two. Just take a second and just type into Q&A where you think you are at this point.
Well, so far we only have one answer. Oh, we have a 1, and now we have a 3-ish. So on a scale of 1 to 5, what is my awareness level of religious and spiritually diverse practices in death, dying, and bereavement? 1 being novice and 5 being expert. We have a 5 and another 3. Probably an average. 4. This is great.
It's great to see. And I thank each of you, from the person on the 1 to the person on the 5 end, to coming today and refining and advancing your skills and better positioning you to provide that care. Often in our academic training, issues of religion and spirituality might be mentioned, but they're not giving the focus as is vital to other components of what we're evolving and increasing need. Hence, we definitely need to look at that at this point to give us like a wide perspective, and then we'll narrow in a little bit. I want to look at some culture variations in beliefs and practices, barriers to bereavement, and then we will delve into some kind of best practices in communicating with religious and spiritually diverse patients and families, and then delve into each of the populations to help give you a good focus. Cultural variations in beliefs and practices that may exist within, and do exist within, all of the 4 primary groups that we're going to talk about today. The gradients of death, and when I refer to this, a literature speaks of their beliefs and their practices, pre and the post-death, and the population differences that do exist within and across. And that's definitely in being mindful of, this is maybe what a population typically, but also differences and variations exist. So very much starting where that patient and that family is to gather that data is vital. Some of the rituals, some are going to be independent, some are going to be collective. Some are going to want us as healthcare practitioners there, others are not. Other side of it is some things that we talk about might be culture to social norms, like tearing of clothing, those kinds of things. Emotional expression wise, there might be some self-mutilation that arises. There also could be issues of emotional expression, how and why that happens. Cultural embedment type perspective that really looks into the roots of those of large society, as well as what that cause of death might be, and is it this cause of death something that is kind of accepted or something that really poses more of a challenge for a patient and family. The spirits of the dead, where do they go? What do they do? Those are things that for us to keep in mind as well. Along with that, 3 key bereavement barriers that our rising minority populations are increasingly encountered are related to economic, social, and ecological factors. And they're things I want you to be aware of. We as practitioners, anywhere from the nursing context to the social worker and chaplains, may be of some assistance to help decrease the potential for these bereavement barriers. From an economic perspective, often individuals have a lower of socioeconomic status. They will have challenges with the ability or feasibility of maybe returning to a homeland that would be required, or often part of the components of what they feel it needs to happen in their beliefs. Sometimes there is a component of a soil that needs to be buried with the person, and it's not easily accessible. Also, family members, extended family members, may not be able to afford plane costs to go back home. There are things to keep in mind. From an ecological perspective, there may be particular foods that population really values and feels are important to memorial services or to post-death rituals, and limitations in availability of those foods could pose a challenge. Also, the people might not be available to complete the tasks that are important in an aspect of the process. From the social environment perspective, this kind of goes back to our quote in the beginning, looking at the societal aspects. There's often that disconnection with societal norms. They may feel, in a sense, alien, as in maybe they work in an environment, for example, that is primarily Christian, and the individual is of a Jewish background. And Jewish individuals often hold a sitting Shiva for the 7 days following the death of a loved one. Oftentimes, workplaces could have a challenge with that if there's issues of diversity and equity that are not really recognized and openly addressed to give that person the support they need. There may be components. Also, the collective participants of groups, that can be a challenge based on where an individual is and also the support they have from their system. So the cultural variations exist, and then also some barriers to bereavement may be on the patient's mind, maybe on the family's mind across the whole time that you are assisting them. So I wanted you to be aware of those. Some patient family centered communication practices that are kind of good tools to put in your toolbox. I want you to keep in mind this quote from D.A. Sherwood, who is a social worker. It's always ethical and appropriate to demonstrate one's beliefs to our patients, but it's seldom ethical to proclaim one's beliefs to them in our professional role. In a sense, Sherwood is reminding us of that, keeping the separation distance from our own beliefs and those of what's held by a patient, in a sense that where we let our beliefs at the door to help understand and provide the support that's needed. And that's a key component of communicating from a verbal and a nonverbal perspective. Some best practices in communication and engagement for you to keep in mind. As I mentioned previously, awareness of the variations within and across populations. For example, if an individual is of a Muslim descent, we can't place them in a box and think they're all going to be the same. Let that patient and that family guide and help you to understand what their beliefs are, what their thoughts are. Be attentive to clues in our own environment, things like maybe taking time out to reflect, identify any like blind spots or barriers that may come up for you, and how can I advance my skills in these areas, or how do I need to respond differently? Be mindful of that ethnocentrism, or that sense of my culture is better, or my beliefs are different and better than this person's. And often using open-ended questions is a great way to kind of comfortably begin navigating this issue. And these questions kind of go beyond what is your spiritual beliefs, or where do I contact when you die? Those kind of things. The open-ended question examples, I give you 5 practical examples to kind of give your framework. Please take these, tweak them, use them in ways that are helpful to you. One question is, what gives you hope? A lot of times you can find out where someone is spiritually in the religious base on that. Who or what provides you with strength? Sometimes that can help you glean on their sense of Allah or another being. What is getting you through each day right now? That might be a great opening question to see where that religious and that spiritual element even falls within their timeline. What is most important to you following the death? This is the thing to keep in mind as the different populations we're going to talk about have particular components of things that they like to have happen right when someone's ready to die, or what needs to happen afterwards. For example, with the Jewish population, that the individual's washing practices are different. Or for some individuals, they like to contact with the astrologer to know where we are with the funeral and memorial services. What's the most important to you in the moments before death? Those are key components. So you as a healthcare team know, what do I need to know? What do I need to be ready to support them in the event that you are there at that time of death? We'll move now into our religious and spiritually diverse population analysis. We're going to be looking at 4 populations, ranging from the smallest percentage to the largest percentage based on the Pew Research Center data. Begin with Buddhist and then move on from there to Hindu, Muslim, and then to Jewish. With each one of the populations, we're going to be looking at their pre- and death-related beliefs and their post-death related practices. The approach we're going to take is I have a case study for each of the populations. I'm going to review the case study, and then I'd like you to type into the Q&A areas of pre- and post-death related beliefs or death-related practices that you kind of stand out to you. And then I have a chart that kind of reviews each one for us. Our first population is the Buddhist, and we're going to meet Bodhi. Bodhi is 65 years old. He's recently diagnosed with terminal kidney cancer. Pema, wife like a friend of 40 years, is his primary caregiver and strives diligently to maintain a calm environment in their home. Pema reports praying continually for peace and Bodhi's soul and spends time daily chanting scripture at the bedside. Their twin sons remain aware of Bodhi's declining health, and family members speak openly about the impending death and reincarnation. Pema is hopeful that Bodhi will reach Nirvana and calls upon a local monk with any changes in Bodhi's health condition. Pema is fearful of giving any medications to Bodhi that could affect his state of mind or cause an early death. During a recent nursing visit, she also shared with staff about making plans to meet with the astrologist following Bodhi's death and planning the funeral. Pema is requesting that staff perform all post-death care quietly and calmly. So take a moment and type thoughts into the Q&A of any beliefs or practices that stand out to you, that, oh, this is a healthcare practitioner, I want to make sure I remember this. As you're continuing to ponder, some key components that stick out is that sense of the open acknowledgement of death within the Buddhist population. They often have a chanting of scripture involve the connections with the astrologist following a death. That sense of making sure someone's state of mind stays clear is very much part of that calm environment piece. Yes, I see. Thank you, Leslie, for the calm environment. Praying, peace, yes, absolutely. Meeting with the astrologist, great points in there. Thank you so much for those. Traditional beliefs and practices. And as I mentioned, I'm giving an overall general perspective because so many unique differences exist within families that there are things for you to delve into using those open-ended questions. Very much that belief that the individual passes through many reincarnations before they're liberated to the nirvana. Maintaining that conscious state, the clarity of mind, and that peaceful environment are vital. Often the monks will visit. There will be some chanting of scripture and that open acknowledgement of the dying. That's one thing to keep in mind, particularly when you're discussing the disease process with individuals and with families. I mentioned in there as well that fear of a sudden death. Buddhists often find a sense of calmness in a later life death or anticipated death versus a sudden accident. From a post-death, we mentioned the rebirth, that spirit will leave the body at the time of death and a whole sense of moving towards the reincarnation. There's a lot of uniqueness in their burial and mourning practices. Often they are going to have a funeral within 1 week that, like I said, that's designed by the astrologist. Diet and alcohol restrictions can vary, but often it's limitations in both or removal of both. Communication with the bereaved is something that often happens. If you would attend a service for a Buddhist family, they're either cremated or buried often. They often will have an open casket and encourage bowing when you view the body. The mourning will last for 3 years, often for a spouse or father, and 100 days for others. I'm checking out the comments here. The clarity of mind there. Absolutely. Donna made a great point about a colleague that she cleaned the body and the family got very upset that he moved or touched the body. There are definitely things to keep in mind and find out what is that family's preferences. It's kind of where those open-ended questions are vital to have conversations of early in the process. Excellent feedback. I'm valuing all of the thoughts. Thank you so much. We'll move on to our next population. We will be looking at the Hindu population. The Hindu population also makes up 0.7% of the population related to the most Pew Research data findings. For our case study and looking at Hindus, we will meet Veer. Veer is 55 years old, recently diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. Darsha, wife of 20 years, maintains a steadfast faith that he will fully recover. She convinced that prayers and fasting will propagate the gods to intercede on her behalf. Darsha spends time daily sitting by the family shrine, chanting verses from the slokas. Their only child, Tavis, is aware of Veer's health status. However, the family never speaks directly of the situation. Tavis is preparing to assume the head of the family role upon his father's death. Darsha or Tavis remain at the bedside 24/7 as visitors calling on the astrologers in hopes of restoring his medical state come and go frequently. Tavis is also busy ordering supplies for the 12 days of grieving or mourning. When death becomes evident, Tavis will place Veer's body on the floor and pour Ganges water in the mouth. Following death and completion of the washing rituals, Darsha will remove the wedding mark from her forehead. Type into the Q&A, what are things that come out to you related to Veer, Darsha, and Tavis? To begin our assessment and dialogue a little bit as you're continuing to think and type your thoughts into the Q&A, definitely that whole sense that they do not have death conversations. The communication style of Donna says is very much vital. Yes, they don't speak about the death. It's kind of one in their belief system of the Hindus and this family that nonverbal is the best way that they feel it's appropriate to not affect that whole process of the individual and the whole worshiping of the bodies and the whole reincarnation that does happen. They do find their comfort in the Hindu holy books and in their hymns. The astrologers there, absolutely. Yes, another piece to pull out for you to keep in mind. Traditional beliefs and practices, they definitely have a very steadfast faith, as you could tell from Darsha there. Very much consulting those astrologers. And they believe that the soul has no beginning or no end. Avoid any type of death conversations. Family or supportive persons will be at the home bedside 24/7. They often chanting the slokas, which is considered their Hindu Bible. They will contact the pandit, and the pandit is often the priest. The Ganges water piece it was in the case study. The Ganges water is water that's from the sacred river in India. And this is where an element of, do we have access to what is vital part of the Hindu belief systems could raise a piece. And that all depends on what the family's beliefs and practices are around that they feel it's important and vital for that to occur. There's that reincarnation, very much that whole sense of societal betterment from the karma. The Brahmin is considered that supreme being or that supreme God that they have. Often there's prayers over the body following the death. The eldest son will become the head of household. Often when you're working with a Hindu family, that eldest son will be the person that you will speak with regarding any health changes, medical changes. There's very much of a washing ritual. Sometimes they're performed by the family. Sometimes they're open to outside healthcare professionals, as well as that kind of that whole sense of where they hold in the home memorials. They are cremated as soon as possible following that death. Children under the age of 3, they will bury, but all others they believe should be cremated following that death. After the funeral, the individuals will change their clothing, and also the pandit will do some purifying of the home with different types of scents. That could occur before or after the death experience. I want you to keep that in mind. The women will often wear white, and the son's hair may be cut or shaved following that death. It's a notice that you may know something that might come to your attention if you would go to that home memorial. The Shadrach is that 1 year later that food is given in memory of the deceased, and that's an important component. That's where the aspect of the bereavement barrier, if the specific foods that family feels are vital to the process of the Shraddh is not easily accessible, is something for us to keep in mind. Claire may double check that. Under the 3, they often will bury them. Yes, Clara, and then they will they will move to cremation for others as soon as possible following that. Key components is definitely to keep in mind is the fact of the not openly discussing death and the different practices and unique practices following that death experience. The next population we're going to explore is the Muslim population. Sometimes it can be considered the Islamic as well. Make up 0.9% of the population, according to the Pew Research study data. There are two types of Muslims that I want you to be aware of, the Shiites and the Shirvani, and those you may encounter in different contexts. And looking at the Muslim, we're going to explore the case of Asma. Asma is 48 years old, was recently diagnosed with terminal breast cancer following declining an exploratory treatment option, stating that I feel my death is Allah's will. So last week, Asma moved in with Ahmed, her older brother, and his wife due to an increasing need for assistance with daily care. Asma is not married and has no children. Family members read from the Quran frequently, reciting passages from the Holy Quran, as well as discuss Asma's upcoming meeting of Allah. When death becomes evident, Ahmed promised Asma he will ensure she is facing Mecca, and following death, places her arms across her chest and closes both eyes. Asma's wife is preparing to complete all post-death care and reviews the plan with them both, often to ensure the transition of Asma's soul. Asma is meeting with the funeral home this week to finalize burial plans and discuss financial concerns following the recent loss of her job due to absenteeism. The family also reassures Asma of their plan to recite the Janza prayers outside the day following her death. Take a moment to reflect on our situation with Asma and type into the Q&A elements of the post-death, pre and post-death related beliefs and practices that kind of come front as interesting insights for you. So we're beginning to get our thoughts. Yes, Leslie, you spoke on just the point that I was going to make too as well. Thank you. The client and the family speak openly about pre and post-death needs. Very much of a difference from the prior group that we discussed. Absolutely. The reading the Quran is very important. Those Muslim scripture passages provide that comfort, that sense of peace. Also, in some contexts, they believe that affects the soul. Yes, Clara, absolutely. The mention of the other brother taking care of us. Thank you so much. Yes, Noel makes a great point about honoring and providing that space. Absolutely. For the Muslim population, traditional beliefs and practices, death is seen as Allah's will. Often the Muslim population will be kind of hesitant or against discussions of advanced directives based on that fact that they feel that process is under Allah's guidance. So just something I want you to keep in mind. The Holy Quran is very comforting. They feel that their suffering is related to the connection with Allah, and that submission, they're going to have a transcendent and they're going to pass that test. Judgment Day occurs in relation to Allah. The body faces Mecca is an important practice I want you to keep in mind. That could be right, that could be left. We're citing those Quran passages and also the Quran, which is a key. The body, some families and patients like that body facing Mecca even a day or so beforehand. Other times it's right before death that they'll feel comfortable. They want that. Post-death, the soul exists following death. The soul separates from that body and then kind of lingers until the judgment day when Allah connects with them. They are buried only, often as soon as possible, facing Mecca. Then there's 3 days of mourning that often occur. And the Shadra, which is those cleaning rituals. And oftentimes those cleaning rituals, as you could see in our case study, must be completed by the family as part of the soul's process. There's a lot of variation in their grief expression, may have outward expression, may be very much of a stoic component. The Janza prayers are read outside days following the death. The family and the community network provide that support and that food to them as well. Tracy raised a good question about accept hospice services due to concerns with the beliefs that they won't be invited. That's one of those individual great questions to say is very much patient specific. I actually, in my hospice years, had a Muslim family that did accept hospice. Just were aware, but they didn't want to be openly discussing the advance directives, but they did accept and were able to work and found a supportive network through the hospice professionals based on their training of the practitioners to understand where things kind of were. The family, in regards to the SHADRAT and that communication network and support, the family only can touch the body to make sure that the healthcare professionals are aware of that. When the person does die, their eyes are closed and their body with their arms across their chest. And they're also often wrapped in a white shroud. And my time during the funeral home industry, assisting bereaved families, often would encounter funeral directors trying to re-coordinate schedules to make sure they could fit in a burial of a Muslim individual. Often they would happen to be early in the morning to make sure they could happen within the 3-day framework that family really wanted, in the sense of knowing how vital that was. And also making sure some families wanted the sun at particular angles at the time that person was buried. Others were more flexible in that. But those are key elements that will be needed to be discussed with making sure they have funeral arrangements connected for those aspects. And the family in the support network is very much vital to them as well. Our final population that we're going to explore today is the Jewish folks. They make up 1.9% of the population, according to the most recent Pew Research study data. Their beliefs might vary from Jewish Orthodox, Reform, or more of a conservative. So that's something I want you to keep in mind. In evaluating the Jewish population, we're going to meet Abigail. Abigail is 67 years old. She's navigating the death of Daniel, her spouse of 40 years, one day ago. Daniel died of inoperable brain cancer following 3 years of treatment. The couple's 2 children, Benjamin and Ava, visited daily prior to death and listened attentively while Abigail read the Shema prayer. They were present at the time of death and took honor in opening the windows, covering all mirrors, repositioning Daniel, and watching his soul unite with God. Benjamin contacted the funeral society for assistance with the Torah immediately following her death. The children, along with community members, offer comfort and ensure a supportive presence for Abigail 24/7. She recites the Kiddush daily and is preparing for Shiva, beginning following tomorrow's funeral. Daniel chose to prepare an ethical will that family members anticipate reviewing following Shalom. Thoughts, things are kind of resonate or are new insights for you related to working with the Jewish population? Yes, Claire, thank you. Claire put some great. The children visit daily, reading the Shema prayer, opening the windows, covering the mirrors. There are things for absolutely vital and also for us as healthcare professionals to be aware of, so we're not kind of caught off guard a little bit in ways. Some other key beliefs to keep in mind: that the dying person is not left alone. Often the 23rd Psalm is also recited along with the Shema prayers. Some traditional beliefs and practices: that life is measured in the deeds. And death is definitely seen as part of the life cycle. The afterlife is a component that's core to often for the Orthodox perspective. A judgment is, in a sense, when Messiah comes. And the Olam is that sense of the world to come. So really, in a sense, where they go on that judgment day is often measured by where their life is in deeds. The vidi is the recitation also happens. Often that is the confession on the deathbed. Dying are not left alone. And a key component I want you to keep in mind with the Jewish population is they strongly believe that the individual should never be in pain. As healthcare practitioners, something for us to be highly attuned to, as we always are in pain management, but particularly among the Jewish, it's seen as an evil, sinful type thing for that person to be in pain. the reading of the 23rd Psalm and the Shomer prayer that we've talked about. Ethical will that was mentioned in our case study. Ethical wills they're basically often the family history, value. They can be words of esteem or personality or hopes that they want to pass on to the next generation. In some cases, they're written down. Other cases, they're recorded, audio or video-wise, for posterity's continuation. So something for to keep in mind if a patient and family talk about completing that or they need assistance with that ethical will process. It's even opportunities for volunteers maybe to come in to help write things down if that's what the family's open to that, or to help with the recording process. In regards to post-death related practices, very much keep in mind the Taraf, which is that burial, is that whole cleansing practices. The burial society is key to that. Not often open to any touching by healthcare professionals. The burial is done as soon as possible. Often there's no cremation or embalming. A tombstone is a fundamental component to the Jewish populations. In remembrances years later, often they'll go back and place stones on those tombstones. So that really is a key component, maybe often almost a year later until they get to the point of that. They honor the dead and they also comfort the mourning. In many cases, those burials include a simple coffin arranged in connection with the Jewish Burial Society. And that consecration of the tombstone is vital to being the mourning is completed in a phase. The Shiva is those 7 days after following the death of a loved one. For example, in a husband-wife context, wife has died. The husband would have 7 days, basically, other than simple hygiene of going to the bathroom, those kind of things. They don't shave, they don't cut their hair, they don't do personal bathing in some cases. And many in ways that they're basically spend about the 7 days just sitting in circles with others. They bring them food, they take care of them. In a sense, it's a time for reflection. The Shalom is that sense of the 30 days following and the prayers that are recited. The Yarset is often an anniversary death in celebrations or scriptures that are read for them. And the Kiddush is the morning prayer. That mourner's prayer is often said at the synagogue in practices of 7, 14, 10 days, months after that death experience to keep in mind. And there's also varying periods in that mourning, which could pose a challenge from the societal perspective from work environments, particularly. And looking at the afterlife beliefs for the Orthodox, absolutely, they believe that in a sense that the individual, from my understanding and uniqueness, does exist from this, Danya. I will say that based on those deeds and that whole sense of judgment that is completed, where the individual is going to go in that afterlife. Sometimes that afterlife, particularly in cases of sudden deaths, can be a sense of comfort for someone in the bereavement process. Great question. Thank you. To summarize our populations that we've looked at today, I kind of created a similarities and differences chart for us. In post-death related scriptural prayer reading, family, individual, and authorities, that's something held by all. Pre and post-death related placement and cleansing rituals or cleansing rituals, that's something held for all. Death is seen as God's will in both the Muslim and the Jewish contexts. Astrologers are contacted primarily among Buddhists and Hindus. The burial only, with the exception of the individuals under the age of 3, occurs within the Muslim and the Jewish populations. Some differences: the post-death spirit or soul. Buddhists believe in a rebirth. Muslims in a soul exists. Hindus in a reincarnation, and the Jewish in an afterlife. Burial practices vary, particularly among the Buddhists, and cremation only among the Hindus. Ethical will is something primarily among the Jewish population. The Muslims and the Jewish include a judgment day, and tombstones can exist across all, but are particular of pillar among the Jewish population. And to summarize our context today, I have a case application that we're going to take about 2 or 3 minutes here and look at. This is Micah, 45-year-old web designer, diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's disease 5 years ago. Micah is transitioning from palliative care to hospice services tomorrow due to increasing need for biopsychosocial, spiritual, and practical support as the disease progresses. Lisa, wife of 20 years, notes signs of fatigue increasing, and Micah rising discussions of my judgment day, as well reading of the Quran. Micah enjoys spending time with her children, ages 10 and 13. Lisa is beginning to prepare emotionally, cognitively, and practically for the moments right before and after the death following Micah's terminal diagnosis today. Micah and Lisa are a Muslim family. Take a moment and I would like you to type into the Q&A just some best practice strategies that you would take in your first encounters with Micah and Lisa from today, things we've talked about today, things that you'll be mindful of. As you're beginning to think and type your thoughts into the Q&A, key things: burial as soon as possible within a Muslim family. Death is seen as Allah's will. There's often an open discussion of death, which is going to be very helpful with the children ages 10 and 13. That reading of the Quran is also key components I want you to take away from there. Yes, it's okay to talk about death facing Mecca. Absolutely, Claire. Thank you. Yes, there is an openness often among the Muslim populations regarding talking about death, which makes it more comforting for helping particularly children through those type of experiences. To sum, and I encourage you to keep reflecting on the case of Micah. Joy, excellent. Thank you for the open-ended questions about Judgment Day and important to the parts of the Quran that are important to you. Excellent thought. That's where you really get to the root of what that comfort is. Thank you, Joy, for typing that in there. And that's a key thing I want each of you to keep in mind, all of us. What's the most important component to that patient and to that family? And getting rooted in that with use of the open-ended questions. To keeping in mind that diversity does exist within and across populations, and some of those bereavement barriers that may pose a challenge that we as healthcare professionals can be assistive of. And the religiously dispersed beliefs and practices shape that whole death of bereavement experience. The more we can empower and offer that sense of self-efficacy to help the patients and the families, the more we're going to help that whole bereavement process for them and just the whole experience for the healthcare team. And I thank you all so much for joining today and the valuable thoughts that you type into our chat, into our Q&A session. And I'll turn it over to Tanya from here.
This was wonderful, Julie. I would like to thank you. Please type your questions in the Q&A to the right of the screen. We're going to go ahead and give you guys a few moments to type in any questions that you do have for Julie regarding today's webinar. You had a lot of responses today. That was wonderful.
I was just so excited. I thank you. That's the vital way that we grow as practitioners, is having a dialogue. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, looks like we have questions coming in, so I'll let you take over, Julie.
Well, sure. Noelle, thank you so much. Being culturally common is empowering and important, and I truly appreciate the opportunity to share this information with you today. Absolutely. The more we as practitioners can be ready to assist in those needs, the more we are positioned to better help the families and the patients to meet those beliefs that are vital to the end of life.
Julie, I'm going to go ahead and watch the Q&A and go ahead and start our closing. But please, if you do have questions, do not stop typing those. We'll go ahead and answer those before we end today's webinar. Thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise today. You can send further questions to Julie's email address, which is listed on the first page of your slides, along with slide number 36 in front of you. Be sure to check out Julie's other webinars by using the View All Webinars link listed here. And from your user portal, you can access the webinar materials, submit a review, and upgrade your order to include on-demand access. Our contact information is listed here if you need any help. On behalf of Julie and your state association sponsors, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.